Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain a movie released in 2016 titled Never Back Down, No Surrenders. This movie tells the story of a former MMA champion who begins to stage a comeback and make another run at the title, pitting his old skills against fighters from the new breed. Will the fighter prove his martial skills again? Let's find out in Never Back Down, No Surrenders. Never Back Down, No Surrender begins by showing Case Walker, a formidable fighter who competes in an attempt to teach his opponents how to use their skills. Case looks very dominating the fight because of his great ability. Even so, his coach asked him to buy time and end the fight in 2 rounds. His coach suggested that no one would want to fight him anymore if he knocked out his opponent right now, but Case can't wait to end the match. After the match, the coach, who was disappointed that he didn't follow his advice, then resigned. Shortly after, Case meets Brody James, an old friend who is also an MMA fighter. Brody then told Case that he had signed with PFC Combat and introduced him to Micah Cruz, a woman who was PFC Combat's director of marketing. Brody asked Case to coach him on that occasion because he would be fighting a tough 7-feet-tall fighter named Cesar Braga in the PFC Championship in Bangkok. Case initially refused and suggested that he cancel the fight because Braga was not a random opponent. But Brody kept reassuring him, knowing Case needs to find his way back as well as attempt to help him go on the straight and narrow. Finally, Case reluctantly accepts Brody's offer and goes to Thailand. Arriving in Thailand, Brody and Braga then held a press conference before the match. However, one of the journalists mentioned Braga about his ex-wife. Braga, who couldn't contain his anger, then turned the table in front of him, causing everyone to panic. It didn't stop there. He also smashed the mirror and sank while venting his anger in the restroom. Seeing Braga's great strength, Brody's fighting spirit immediately subsided. On the other hand, after storing his things at the hotel, Case then goes to the Top Fight gym, where Brody trained during PFC Combat. However, Case was not welcomed there, especially by Brody's coach, Matty Ramos. While Case prepares the things needed to train Brody, a tough fighter named Cobra will do a sparring practice. Everyone was looking forward to it because Cobra was the strongest fighter after Brody in the gym. Cobra can easily knock out his opponent in a practice match, but his attention is distracted when he sees Case training alone in the corner of the room, which he finds very unconvincing. Shortly after, Brody arrives at the gym and asks Case to spar with him, but Cobra intervenes and asks Case to spar with him first. Case was reluctant to serve Cobra, but because he was so proud of his abilities, Case finally agreed to practice sparring with him. During the sparring practice, Case blocked Cobra movement without any effort and only used a few basic movements that didn't take much energy to bring down Cobra. Due to a fairly severe injury during a practice match against Case, Cobra was finally rushed to the hospital for medical treatment. The next day, the president of PFC Combat, a man named Hugo Vega, came to Case and demanded accountability because Case had injured one of his best fighters. Vega asks Case to replace Cobra, which he immediately rejects because he no longer wants to fight under Vega, who is revealed to have some history with him. One of the up-and-coming fighters named Taj then begged Vega to make himself a replacement for Cobra. But after seeing Taj's amateur fighting style, Vega was fed up and left. Along with another fighter named Creech, Taj then approaches Case, who is training, and begs him to train them. Case agreed to coach the 2 young men after completing his training. That night, Case taught Taj and Creech some basic punching techniques for initial practice. The next day, Micah, who seems to like Case, asks him out on a date. Case, who apparently also likes Micah, immediately accepts her invitation and finally finds out that Micah is a single mother and has a daughter named Morgan. When Case is dating Micah, Maddie turns out to be watching the 2 together and decides to tell Brody about it. On the other hand, because recently Brody seems to be lacking in training spirit, Vega recommends that he use steroids to make the fight a success and he can beat Braga and help him recover before the match. Maddie then tells Brody about Micah and Case, where their date ends abruptly when Micah discusses Case's time in prison, which makes him very uncomfortable. That night while at the gym, Brody immediately challenges Case to sparring. However, Brody immediately attacked Case indiscriminately, and Case immediately responded with sharp attacks until he finally managed to knock Brody down. Case then asks Brody if he's lost control, but their friendship seems to have ended. The next day, Micah apologizes to Case for offending him yesterday by bringing up the past. After training one night, Case and Brody agree to dinner together. It was then that Brody realized his mistake and apologized to Case as he caught fire with jealousy and lost control. Brody promises Case that he will do things the right way and even tells him that Micah will be a good woman for him and support their relationship. Brody tells Case that he wants to focus more on his training because the fight against Braga is getting closer and he wants to beat the big guy. Case eventually finds out that Brody is taking steroids on Vega's recommendation. Long story short, Brody begins to earnestly undergo his training with Case and Maddie to win the fight against Braga. On the other hand, Case and Micah's relationship became closer, where they often dated and spent time together. One day, Case is visited by one of Viga's men who offers him a contract so that he is willing to become a fighter in PFC combat, which he immediately rejects. When Case and Brody came to the gym the next day, they saw other fighters huddled together and watched the videotape of Case beating a racist cop in handcuffs 2 years ago. The video went viral and attracted the attention of many people so that journalists started arriving and wanted to interview Case. Micah then takes Case to one of Viga's houses to be protected from the reporter's scrutiny. She then proposes to Case to accept Viga's offer to fight in PFC combat, but again Case refused. The following day, Case comes to the gym and is surprised that Viga sends a Sambo wrestler named Boris to train Brody, which he and Maddie think is completely unnecessary and could harm Brody. Case and Maddie's worries finally happened, where Boris injured Brody's knee during training, which resulted in Brody undergoing intensive treatment for weeks, even though his fight against Braga was only a matter of days. Because Brody is injured, Viga then offers Case $1 million so that he is willing to fight Braga. Micah reveals to Case that Brody's injury is what Viga has wanted the most so far. Case then assumes that Viga may have intentionally injured Brody indirectly. The next day, Case's suspicions that Viga had intentionally injured Brody were finally proven when he secretly searched Boris' locker and found a text message between Boris and Viga, in which Viga ordered Boris to injure Brody so that he could not participate in the match and was replaced by Case. He then told Brody, Maddie, Micah, and the others. Case realized that he was indeed forced to fight, but Case and the others are determined to find a way to stop Braga and Viga, who will make a lot of money from the fight and prove that Hugo Viga is responsible for Brody's injury. On the other hand, Case began to train hard to face Braga in the upcoming fight. Shortly after, on the night of the fight, Micah, who had become Case's girlfriend, told Viga that she had resigned and no longer worked for him. Case's fight against Braga in fact attracted the attention of many people, including one of the famous martial arts actors from Thailand, Tony Jaa, who turned out to be Case's fan. While talking to Brody in the locker room, Case finally realizes how to stop Viga and make him responsible for all he did to Brody. He is deliberately starting a fight with Braga outside the ring. After successfully igniting Braga's anger, which immediately attacked Case, they finally fought outside the ring, witnessed by the entire audience and media crew covering the fierce battle. When Braga drops Case and corners him multiple times with multiple fatal attacks, Case tries to get up and uses Kyokushin, a traditional karate technique, and manages to fracture Braga's ribs. Knowing that the move turned out to be quite effective, Case continued to use traditional karate techniques and knocked Braga with kite and jerry on his head, causing the big man to fall and become unconscious. Since Braga had been defeated outside the ring, the fight was cancelled, which caused Viga to suffer huge losses as the audience and the sponsors demanded their money back. Viga was furious and threatened to take Case to court, but Case then tells Viga that they have evidence of his involvement in the accident that injured Brody and threatens to report Viga, in which case the lawsuit could cost Viga millions of dollars. Case, Micah, Brody, and their friends then leave the battle arena after knowing they have achieved the desired victory. The lesson we can take from this film is that we should never underestimate other people, regardless of their physical appearance or strength. It also shows the close friendship between Case and Brody, where Case is willing to help his best friend sincerely and help him change into a better person so that his life gradually improves.